In Module 1, we will talk about monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and the various concepts related to it. But first, let us define what MEL means. M stands for monitoring in the MEL process. It refers to the routine tracking of project resources, activities, and results, and the analysis of the information to guide project implementation. It can be said to be the systematic and continuous collection and analysis of information about the progress of development intervention. Monitoring ensures that all the people who need to know about the intervention are properly informed and decisions can be taken in a timely manner. E stands for evaluation in the MEL process. According to Michael Scriven, the process of determining the merit, worth, or value of something or the product of the process is evaluation. It refers to the periodic assessment and analysis of an ongoing or completed project. L stands for learning in the MEL process. It is a process through which information generated from M&E is reflected upon and intentionally used to improve a project's ability to achieve results continuously. Now that we know what MEL stands for, we can also say that it is an approach to evaluate or assess programs. It provides tools to help grant makers evaluate and improve programs. NGOs, government agencies, and other grant makers can use MEL when they need a systematic way to monitor comprehensively, evaluate selectively, and learn continuously to support their programs or initiatives. Let us consider an example of a problem in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. In Nairobi city's rural communities, the number of females suffering from HIV/AIDS infection is rising. Women don't seek therapy for a variety of reasons, including a lack of confidence in medicine, accessibility issues, social stigma, and the cost of the medical treatment itself. To solve this problem, a health system has been established to implement prevention and treatment policies. Within the confines of the current legal system, health professionals have gained new abilities and can provide the HIV/AIDS community with the necessary support. For such a project, MEL can help solve crucial questions that can determine the success of this intervention. Some of these questions can be: how to design the project? What should be its key components? What causal pathways should it build? Who should it target? Etc. And once the project is implemented, questions such as how to monitor the project, how to use monitoring data, how many indicators should we have, etc. become crucial. This is primarily the work of MEL. Let's take a closer look at the history of evaluation, which 4 waves of political thought have shaped: the experimental wave, the dialogic wave, the neoliberal wave, and the evidence-based wave. Robert Picciotto has also identified a 5th wave, which he calls the social impact wave. There's one more which has started to emerge prominently, and it's called the transformation wave. Before we can understand the 6th wave, we must talk about the meaning of transformation in the first place. Evaluators work in situations where social inequalities make it hard to make choices about programs and how to measure their success. For this reason, the definition of ethics is important for evaluators who consciously position themselves as promoters of human rights and social justice. To help with these kinds of big choices, the transformative paradigm provides a way to think about the assumptions that guide evaluators. This puts evaluators in the complicated territory of cultural views and norms that may help or hurt social change that is transformative. Rather than giving priority to evaluator-driven transformational evaluations of global public policies and programs, International Evaluation Academy, which is the IAA, proposes to probe new frontiers in evaluation knowledge and practice. This includes Social Tipping Points, which is a research and demonstration initiative focused on improving understanding of how tipping points accelerate environmental and social transitions, and how evaluation can use this new knowledge to trigger positive social change. Number 2 is beyond GDP measures. In this, display alternatives to the GDP metric for ranking national performance towards socially and environmentally sustainable outcomes are covered. Third, broadening the evaluation agenda. This initiative would examine whether transformation should be added to accountability and learning as an overarching evaluation goal, and if so, how this new goal might productively connect with the other goals. Number 4, climate litigation support. This domain explores how evaluation methods can be used to assess legal interventions aimed at improving compliance with global climate agreements. It seeks to determine the effectiveness of these methods and their potential for supporting climate change mitigation efforts. Number 5, decolonization. Decolonization in evaluation means moving away from Western ways of thinking and behaving and making evaluation a public good instead of a market commodity. This involves exploring new evaluation approaches and engaging in dialogues with partners to encourage reform. Now let us have a look at the MEL landscape from the view of the South. After independence, centralized planning processes needed information from evaluations. Because of this, the Central Program Evaluation Office (PEO) was set up with field offices in all 50 states, but it could only evaluate a small number of programs. At the moment, the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation Office at Niti Aayog is in charge of program monitoring and evaluation for all central and centrally sponsored schemes. Then, an era of international aid began, and evaluation started to be done all over the world. It also led to the start of groups for professionals. In 1991, funders from Global North were looking for accountability. That is, how has their money been spent? Evaluators from the Global North used to conduct evaluations in the Global South. This led to the formation of professional associations in the Global North. Finally, the OECD came up with the DAC criteria to evaluate the policies and programs. From the 2000s to the 2010s, there was a slow change from evaluation of aid to evaluating development. Due to this, the Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness was launched in the year 2005. It focused on the use of evaluation for learning, program improvement, and evidence-based policy making. It was geared to serve the needs of marginalized and deepened citizen engagement. Lastly, evaluation discourse came into being. This is where localized ways of evaluating, decolonization, and other things came into play. If we look deeper into MEL, we can see that it shows a wide landscape around the world. Professional bodies and networks like the International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation, the Voluntary Organization for Professional Evaluation, etc., were set up to improve the culture and systems of evaluation. In addition, the Indian government has set up national evaluation systems and policies, such as Niti Aayog and the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, among others. There are also independent evaluation organizations like World Bank and Asian Development Bank. Furthermore, evaluation firms such as JPAL Sambodhi have also come into action. Having had a lesson in the basics surrounding MEL, we will now discuss concepts such as program cycles, theories, and work on defining program contours. We hope this video was informative, and we look forward to seeing you in the next. Let's get started by understanding what a program and project is. A project refers to a specific endeavor to deliver tangible outputs. It is executed and managed for a particular duration of time with a definite beginning and end date. It has a clear aim because it is a one-time undertaking. Constructing a building or researching to develop a new manufacturing process is an example of a project. On the other hand, we have a program. A program is a set of multiple projects. managed and delivered together as a single package. They are designed to achieve a common benefit. Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana is an example of the same. Interventions for social development are planned and carried out in the form of a project or program that goes through a cycle. This cycle is called the project cycle. Let's understand each component of a program cycle in detail. First up is situation analysis. It is a critical phase of the project management cycle that involves evaluating the internal and external factors that can affect the project's success. This analysis helps in identifying the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the project. Suppose a company is planning to launch a new product. In that case, a situation analysis can help identify the market demand, competition, and regulatory requirements that can affect the product's success. Next is problem gap analysis. A problem gap analysis is a process of identifying the gap between the current situation and the desired situation. It helps in identifying the problems that the project aims to solve and evaluating the available solutions. The analysis helps in defining the project requirements and setting the project goals and objectives. Suppose a company is facing issues with its customer service. In that case, a problem gap analysis can help identify the current challenges, customer expectations, and available solutions to improve customer service. After that, we have project identification and design. This phase involves defining the project idea, objectives, scope, and resources required to implement the project successfully. The team identifies the key stakeholders and develops a plan for managing the project. Suppose a company wants to implement a new IT system. In that case, project identification and design can help define the project scope, budget, timeline, and resources required for implementation. The next step is the implementation and monitoring phase. This involves executing the project plan and tracking the project's progress. The team regularly measures the project's performance against predefined criteria, identifies any deviation, and takes corrective actions to address any issues. Suppose a company is implementing a new marketing campaign. In that case, implementation and monitoring can help track the campaign's progress, measure the effectiveness, and take corrective actions to improve its success. And finally, we have evaluation. It involves assessing its success against the predefined criteria and identifying any areas for improvement. This phase helps in learning from the project's success and failures, which can be used to improve future projects. For example, after completing a construction project, the team can evaluate its success by measuring its cost, timeline, and quality against predefined criteria. This evaluation can help identify any areas for improvement in the future construction projects. Program theory determines what a program intends to do. It is necessary to construct a plausible and sensible model for how a program is supposed to work. This theory is based on a series of micro steps that make important assumptions about the program. Without a program theory, a project may even seem like a maze. Program evaluations are conducted for stakeholders to check the progress and are also utilized by the audience for knowledge creation. They are engaged in the evaluation process and play a participative role while showing an active interest in their program. Evaluators can also use stakeholders during evaluation since the information may have to be shared with audiences. During an evaluation, being mindful of this terminology represents your values in front of the stakeholders and audiences as an evaluator and guides the evaluation practice to become more participatory. Before we delve deeper into these concepts, we must understand what a basic logic model means. Logic model is a systematic and visual way to present relationships among the resources you have to operate your program, the activities you plan, and the changes or results you hope to achieve. This is what a basic logic model looks like. You have your resources, followed by activities, which make up the planned work. It is followed by outputs, then outcomes, then impact, which make up your intended results. Although these terms like output, outcome, impact sound similar, they are entirely different when we interpret them. Outputs are the desired objectives from the program, but they do not have a measurable impact on its beneficiaries. On the contrary, an outcome is the actual value addition that results from the output of the program. While outcome refers to specific and measurable short-term effects, impact can adopt a more comprehensive viewpoint, looking to broader and long-term effects. Having discussed a basic logic model, let's discuss the logic framework approach. It enables the main elements of a project to be concisely summarized and brings structure and logic to the relationship between project purpose, intended inputs, planned activities, and expected results. If used with flexibility, this approach to planning encourages creative thinking and promotes participatory engagement between all parties throughout the project lifecycle. Here, you can see a log frame, a tool to describe the results of an LFE project design process. These are some of the questions it answers. After determining the program purpose, resources, etc., we move on to the project implementation plan or strategic plan, which outlines the steps a team should take when accomplishing a shared goal or objective. This plan combines strategy, process, and action, and will include all parts of the project, from scope to budget and beyond. The implementation plan is a step-by-step guide for achieving project goals. A PIP will have the following components, which vary depending on the nature of the project: objectives, scope statement, outline of deliverables, task due dates, risk assessment, and team member roles and responsibilities. Let's move on to understanding the results framework first, and we will also discuss some terms such as inputs, outputs, intermediate outcomes, outcomes, and impact, which are often used interchangeably but are different in this context. A results framework is a tool used in project or program management to organize and track progress towards achieving desired outcomes. Inputs refer to the resources, materials, or factors that are used in a process or system to achieve a specific goal, whereas outputs are the tangible or intangible products that are generated as a direct result of a process. Intermediate outcomes and outcomes sound similar, but they refer to different things. Intermediate outcomes are the short-term results that occur as a result of an intervention, but are not necessarily the final desired outcomes. They often serve as progress markers towards achieving the ultimate outcomes. On the other hand, outcomes refer to the long-term results that are achieved through an intervention. Lastly, impact refers to the broader and long-term effect achieved as a result of an intervention. It represents the overarching changes that occur at a societal, organizational, or individual level, and it often reflects the broader significance of the intervention in terms of its contribution to the desired outcomes. It's time to discuss results and monitoring framework in detail. A results framework depicts the different levels or chains of results expected from the intervention in a graphic display. The framework shows the long-term objectives, intermediate outcomes, and outputs that lead to those desired longer-term objectives and clarifies the expected time horizon to see changes in those outcomes. On the other hand, a monitoring framework provides the means for determining if a program is on course to achieve its aim. Development programs are based on an underlying theory of how proposed actions will achieve the intended results. Monitoring framework is the ongoing process of collecting and analyzing data, which focuses on activities and highlights implementation gaps to inform tweaks in deployment. Then we have the outcomes framework, which measures medium-term and longer-term outcomes, thereby aiding learning or adaptation. Decoding indicators. What is an indicator? We have come quite a long way into this course, which is why it is the perfect time to dig even deeper and learn about indicators. An indicator is a unit of information which is measured over time. It depicts change in condition under observation. A good indicator will be easy to understand, measurable, precise, and defined without any positive or negative value attached. Let us now understand how a theory of change can be applied. But first, what is a theory of change? As a specific and measurable description of a social change initiative, theory of change is a framework for understanding what the program's purpose is, what success looks like, and how the program will create value. It is the basis for decision-making for strategic direction, planning, measurement, reporting, and learning. But how is it different from other methods of describing initiatives? Well, TOC changes the way you think, starting with what you want to achieve and then working backwards to intermediate outcomes and any early-term changes to actions which are important to implement the desired changes. It also describes the context and brings to light how a program context interacts with program logic. It depicts a causal pathway that links activities to outcomes to big picture impact. It also requires underlying assumptions to be surfaced, tested, and measured. Now the question is, what is it used for? So TOC, which is additionally referred to as the co-creation process, is intended to facilitate an agreement among stakeholders on how and why the program will bring about change. Isn't the fact that intervention is needed enough? This can be answered with the help of a little description of how it works. Standard evaluation approaches such as baseline or project and control group are not sufficient to deal with complex interventions. Qualitative case studies are often added, but they still may not adequately explain the underlying mechanisms of a program. This is where the theory of change framework comes in. It helps unpack the black box of a program and understand the space between actual input and expected output. The black box of a program contains several theories of how and why the program will work. These are in the form of assumptions that need to be tested. However, stakeholders may have different perspectives on the black box, which need to be brought to light. Additionally, the black box may differ depending on the context, including natural resources, terrain, livelihood opportunities, markets, governance, regulations, people in power, cultural norms, and the needs of the poorest. It is important to note that change varies across contexts due to the scale of the program and its potential for replication. For a program to be replicable, it must have been successful in the past and fit well with the other sample. Understanding the theory of change and contextual factors can help improve the effectiveness and scalability of a program. We can now move to understanding the assumptions and preconditions associated with theory of change. Assumptions are conditions or resources that the program staff and stakeholders believe are needed for the success of the program, and that they believe already exist. They are crucial because, if inaccurate, they can completely alter how the program works. Some assumptions are implicit and more difficult to reveal, which requires probing from external facilitators. For example, in a training program, the underlying assumption is that the training center is accessible and women have the mobility to reach them. However, the assumption that a training center is accessible to all participants is not always valid. In many cases, women may face various barriers that prevent them from attending training programs, such as lack of transportation, cultural restrictions, or childcare responsibilities. Preconditions, on the other hand, need to be brought about for the program to flow from one logical state to the next. When working backwards from the long-term goal, preconditions refer to the earliest changes that need to occur to achieve the goal. All outcomes except the long-term outcomes are also preconditions. They are called that because they are conditions that must exist for the next outcome in the pathway to be achieved. For example, in a training program, the long-term outcome may be to improve the students' overall skills and knowledge. To achieve this, several intermediate outcomes need to be achieved, such as the students grasping the taught concepts, successfully applying those concepts in practical situations, and demonstrating an overall improvement in their skills. We can define monitoring as being an ongoing, continuous, routine process of data collection. On the other hand, evaluation is the systematic collection of data at specific intervals. Monitoring requires track changes in the program over time to simultaneously make corrective actions. Evaluation answers whether the intended results were achieved and attribution of factors that contributed to the results of the program, which may have led to the outcomes. Monitoring ensures the linking of activities to the objectives and resources, whereas to conduct an evaluation, a special study design is required. Monitoring is an activity always undertaken by an internal team concerned with the collection of data, while evaluation is undertaken by an external team or a group of experts for data collection and outcome assessments. The process of monitoring enables managers to be reported on the progress and simultaneously alerts them to rising problems. In terms of evaluation, it provides lessons, highlights program potential, and offers recommendations for improvement. We can now move on to discussing monitoring on its own. Let us first define it. Monitoring is the process of regularly observing or documenting the actions occurring within a project. We can also understand it as the process of keeping track of how project activities are doing through deliberate and methodical observation. It involves giving feedback about the progress of the project to the donors, implementers, and beneficiaries of the project. It is an important part of effective management because it can provide early and ongoing information to help shape implementation in advance of evaluations. Some examples that evaluators use for a program are semi-structured interviews, focus group discussions, surveys, and questionnaires. By using a combination of these methods, evaluators can collect comprehensive data about a program and assess it effectively for further improvement and program implementation. The monitoring process can be divided into 5 important parts of its successful completion. The first is initiation. This stage of monitoring involves creating the project's outline. In this phase, high-level decisions are made regarding the purpose, feasibility, and determining what is needed for the project and other factors like the establishment of the team and stakeholders of the project. Second is planning. During planning, the scope and details of the program that must be carried out throughout execution are made. It is common to identify the project risks that could potentially hinder the progress during this stage. Third is executing. It entails carrying out all of the tasks listed in the planning phase. The order of the project's activities is decided during this stage, which may depend on the project's scope, any corrective actions, goals, etc. Fourth is closing. This phase comprises completing the project strategy, informing stakeholders, securing acceptance of project deliverables, and documenting the lessons learned throughout the project. Fifth is control and monitoring. This phase involves ensuring that the project is on the right track and that all the tasks are completed in a defined manner. This is done through observation of the project after project implementation, identifying the risks and problems, and deploying a mitigation strategy to control the new process. Since we have understood the distinguishing factors of monitoring and evaluation, let us now move on to discussing monitoring frameworks used in the process. A monitoring framework provides the means for determining if a person is on the right track to achieve its objectives. It should be designed to monitor quality at different levels and for different groups. Monitoring frameworks draw on a number of different tools and components to collect and organize data needed to monitor a program's performance. Monitoring should occur both at the individual and program level. An effective monitoring plan should provide answers to several questions such as: Which indicators should be measured to determine what was done, how well it was done, and what was achieved? The indicator should be directly related to the expected outcome or goal. Who will collect this data and how will it be collected? This will indicate the institution or individuals responsible for the collection and the tools to be used, like checklists, forms, or surveys. How will the data flow from the locations of data collection to the stakeholders? Who will check the data quality, conduct the data analysis, draft reports, and make decisions based on the data? How will this data be managed to be accessible to those who need it? To understand the elements of a monitoring framework and how it is used, let us look at the types of monitoring frameworks. As discussed by Hutto, there are 4 basic types of monitoring that can be readily distinguished based on the nature of questions designed to address. Number 1. Surveillance monitoring. It is defined as the systematic ongoing collection, collation, and analysis of data and the timely dissemination of information to those who need to know so that action can be taken. Second is implementation monitoring, which is also known as outcome monitoring. It ensures that the program maintains fidelity to its design and helps mitigate threats to internal validity. Third is effectiveness monitoring. This type of monitoring addresses the question of how successful a project ultimately is at restoring the ecosystem or component parts. Fourth is ecological effects monitoring. It is defined as the observation of processes and indicators that shape ecosystem dynamics and structures, leading to knowledge of how ecosystems work, indicators of ecological integrity, and how they may be managed based on modeling. The 4 types of monitoring can be understood with the help of the diagram below, which explains the nature of questions involved in each type of monitoring and how it can fit into a broader adaptive management loop. If land management agencies are intending to conduct adaptive management, they will fund and seek partnerships to conduct each of the 4 types of monitoring as mentioned above. Within this framework, we will be able to understand each type. Knowledge of current land conditions emerges from the surveillance monitoring results to identify any changes over time. If current conditions seem undesirable, then the remedy may require on-the-ground activity, where things are actually happening. This will require implementation, effectiveness, and ecological effects monitoring to be conducted for the system. The starting point for the conceptual model is given in the clouds in the diagram, such as assessing the existing condition and seeing if it is okay or unknown, and what are its problematic areas, or if it needs any changes. These starting points indicate the current condition of resources, as determined through surveillance monitoring or some other kind of assessment. As seen in the diagram, implementation monitoring will be necessary to determine whether the stakeholders funded the project to be done according to the intended outcomes. Effectiveness monitoring will be necessary to determine whether the activity achieved the explicitly stated short-term and long-term goals. Lastly, ecological effects monitoring will be necessary to determine whether there were any unintended consequences that threaten the long-term ecological sustainability and biological diversity of the entire system. The arrows in between the box and the clouds indicate the results of each kind of monitoring. These results are then taken forward for discussion with the management during an annual adaptive management meeting. Here, the involved stakeholders meet with various monitoring group leaders to discuss the program questions and results. Now let us understand each type of monitoring and how they perform based on the nature of the program, beginning with surveillance monitoring. It is a method of making repeated standardized surveys so that the changes can be detected. It also uncovers and tracks the direction and magnitude of trends. Through repeated surveys over time, this type of monitoring enables the understanding of the flow of activities or behavior, which enables probable future trends. An example can be the systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of data from time to time to bring out ways to prevent and cure diseases in remote areas. Let us now move on to the next type of monitoring called implementation monitoring. It is a type of monitoring that requires the researcher to understand the effect of a program if it has been implemented as designed. For example, we can assess whether the program reached the correct participants, the correct time, quality, or quantity. This ensures that the aspects of the program have been implemented correctly and the positive effects of the program are showing. Through this approach, the evaluators are able to avoid any incorrect conclusions or implementation of the program. There are certain indicators that are used to monitor when it comes to implementation monitoring, such as availability, uptake, quality, fidelity, and compliance, depending on the study or program. Since we have understood how implementation monitoring is used as a monitoring framework, how about we understand the context and complexity of monitoring? When we talk about the context and complexity of monitoring, we must talk about its type, which include performance, context, and complementary monitoring. Performance monitoring can be understood as the measurement of the ongoing and systematic collection of performance indicator data and other quantitative or qualitative information to reveal whether implementation is on track and whether expected results are being achieved. In context monitoring, the researcher collects information about conditions and external factors that are relevant to the implementation and performance of a project undertaken. Context and performance monitoring are used to supplement complementary monitoring. This involves a complexity-aware approach to predict the probable changes to the program. Let us now understand how context monitoring can be undertaken for a study. Context monitoring tracks the overall setting in which the project operates, and therefore is often called situation monitoring. It is used to supplement the complexity-aware monitoring approaches, helping to answer several questions that are often missing or unpredictable in the program. There are four major approaches that are used in complexity-aware monitoring, which are developed to integrate with or build upon the traditional M&E systems. They are social network analysis, sentinel indicators, contribution analysis, and most significant changes. The diagram on the left shows the social agreement technical certainty matrix. As shown in this diagram, simple problems are those in which stakeholders have a common goal of solving the existing problem and they are highly aware of the causes and solutions pertaining to the problem. There are two ways to understand the complicated problems. There can be a high level of social agreement but low technical certainty, or there can be a low social agreement but high technical certainty. In terms of complex problems, it is where there are low levels of both technical certainty and social agreement about an issue. To present you with a clear picture of how context and performance monitoring work, let us look at the given diagram. The boxes consist of the key functions of process evaluation and relations among them that determine the nature of the investigation. It also enables us to determine and interpret the outcomes. Now the question arises, what to monitor? Monitoring can be based on the four factors of reach, context, fidelity, and equity. Each of these factors include the key pointers that must be considered when the researcher monitors a program. Under the reach factor, we need to consider things like the number of units delivered or the number of service delivery points that are operational and the time for service delivery. When we look at the context of monitoring, we are basically looking at the effects of external factors and internal factors on service delivery, any adaptations made to it, along with the feedback from the beneficiaries. In terms of monitoring fidelity, we need to bring forth details of the number of units delivered that comply with the set benchmarks, along with the events planned and the average time for an event. And lastly, in terms of equity, we need to take care to note the type of beneficiaries that were serviced, the spatial distribution of service delivery, and consumer feedback. It is crucial to understand how a project can be managed effectively and efficiently using the Management Information System, which we will now discuss in detail through web-based and mobile-based Management Information System. Web-based MIS is a software that uses online technology to function and must include comprehensive project management tools such as broad project planning, command over the execution, data analysis, etc. The web-based MIS aids in establishing a broad level of control over the project's objectives and in assessing their success. In contrast to web-based MIS, we have the mobile-based MIS, which is more accessible due to the prevalence of mobile infrastructures, offering more bandwidth and consistent connectivity. End-user terminals are often wirelessly connected and easily portable in space, which are then used to access information resources and services. Since we have understood the concepts of the types of monitoring and the components of what to monitor, let us focus on understanding what the theory of systemic change means. The theory of systemic change refers to the comprehensive approach of transforming social systems, organizations, or communities to create long-term sustainable changes. This theory underscores the notion that any noticeable shift in a given system arises from interconnected and dynamic forces that interact with each other in a complex and intersecting manner. The concept of systemic change has emerged to fill gaps in traditional M&E frameworks. The process involves the identification of the root causes of problems, followed by the design and implementation of interventions that target the entire system, rather than just individual components. The inwards-out process monitors the program performance by acknowledging the internal change that must occur before the external change can be sustained. This contributes to the program's success or failure. This involves looking inward and reflecting on the design, implementation, and outcomes of a system in order to assess whether it aligns with the overall goals of bringing about systemic change. It requires introspection and self-reflection to gain a better understanding of the system and its impact. Through this perspective, the evaluators can examine the internal perspective and identify the changes required and develop strategies to overcome these constraints that hinder the overall progress. The outwards-in process involves looking outwardly at the external factors that impact the working of the program. This process focuses on understanding the needs and wants of stakeholders outside of the program and how their desired outcomes interact with the internal workings of the program. By examining it from this perspective, evaluators can identify opportunities for leveraging external resources, building partnerships, and influencing policy or institutional change that can facilitate systemic change. Evaluation is a process of assessing or judging something based on specific criteria or standards. It involves gathering information, analyzing data, and making judgments or conclusions about the quality, effectiveness, efficiency, or value of a particular object, system, process, or program. Let's say, for example, there's a program being conducted for developing a community event to allow participants to contribute. For this program, the evaluator may evaluate the following questions to assess their strategies. Question 1. Who came to the community event? For this question, the evaluator will have to use the observation method to assess the people who came to participate in the community event. Question 2. What new initiatives have emerged? To answer this question, after a period of 6 months, the evaluator would need to get in touch with the key people to conduct phone interviews. Through these interviews, the evaluator would need to find out what new initiatives have started to emerge so that the people can contribute to their community. Evaluations can be conducted using different methods, such as qualitative and quantitative data collection, surveys, interviews, observations, and analysis of existing data, depending on the nature of the subject being evaluated and the purpose of the evaluation. The results of the evaluation are used to inform the stakeholders, such as policymakers, managers, and practitioners, about the findings and recommendations for making informed decisions, as well as improving the quality and effectiveness of the object or process being evaluated. Now, let's try to understand what an evaluation framework entails. An evaluation framework provides the structure for the entire evaluation exercise. It includes an overall program theory or logic model, principles that guide planning, management, and conducting evaluations. Examples of conceptual frameworks in evaluation can be understood through examples like the causal framework, the contribution framework, and the gender analysis framework. In a causal framework, we are able to identify the cause and effect relationships between program activities and outcomes. Causal studies focus on an analysis of a situation or a specific problem to explain the patterns of relationships between variables. For example, let us suppose that a company implements a new individual marketing strategy for a small group of customers. Through this strategy, they are able to see a measurable increase in the monthly subscription of the customers. After receiving identical results from several groups by using this marketing strategy, they concluded that the one-to-one marketing strategy has the causal relationship they had intended. It's time to discuss the types of approaches used in evaluation for a program. Quantitative evaluation. This approach involves the collection and analysis of numerical data to assess the performance and impact of a program or intervention. It often includes statistical methods such as surveys, questionnaires, experiments, and data analysis using statistical software to measure outcomes, impacts, and trends. Qualitative evaluation. This approach involves the collection and analysis of non-numerical data, such as interviews, focus groups, observations, and case studies to gain an in-depth understanding of the experiences, perceptions, and behaviors of program participants and stakeholders. Then we have the mixed methods evaluation. This approach combines both quantitative and qualitative methods to provide a comprehensive understanding of a program or intervention. Next up is process evaluation. This approach focuses on the inputs, activities, and outputs of a program or intervention to assess the implementation fidelity, reach, and quality of services delivered. It often involves monitoring and documentation of program activities, stakeholders' feedback, and analysis of program records and documents. Cost-effectiveness evaluation. This approach assesses the cost-effectiveness and cost-benefit of a program or intervention by comparing the costs incurred with the outcomes achieved. Developmental evaluation. This approach is often used in complex and dynamic settings to support ongoing learning, adaptation, and innovation. Utilized focused evaluation. This approach focuses on ensuring that evaluation findings are relevant, credible, and useful for decision makers and stakeholders. It involves active engagement of stakeholders in the evaluation process, utilization of evaluation findings for decision making, and emphasis on evaluation use and uptake. Finally, we have the participatory evaluation. This approach involves active participation of program participants, stakeholders, and communities in the evaluation process. There are different designs that can be used to evaluate programs. Given that each program is unique, it is important to choose an evaluation design that aligns with the program goals, research questions, purpose of the evaluation, and available resources. Therefore, to evaluate the effect that a program has on participants' behavior and knowledge, we can broadly classify the evaluation designs into two types: experimental and non-experimental designs. Experimental design. This design involves randomly assigning participants or groups to different conditions, such as an intervention group and a control group, to measure the outcomes and determine the effectiveness of the intervention. Randomized controlled trials are an example of experimental designs. Non-experimental designs. These are evaluation designs that do not involve random assignment of participants or groups to different conditions. Unlike experimental designs, non-experimental designs do not establish causality as rigorously, as they do not have the control of confounding variables that random assignment provides. Some common non-experimental designs include observational study, cross-sectional study, and quasi-experimental study. There are different methods used in evaluation to collect the data for the program. First is surveys. Surveys involve collecting data from participants or stakeholders through structured questionnaires or interviews. Next is interviews. Interviews involve conducting structured or semi-structured conversations with participants or stakeholders to gather qualitative data about their experiences, perspectives, and feedback on the program or intervention being evaluated. Third is observation. Observations involve systematically observing and recording program activities, processes, or outcomes in real time. Observations can provide objective data on program implementation, fidelity, and quality, and can be used to assess program outcomes such as participant behaviors, interactions, or performance. Next is performance measures or metrics. These involve quantitatively assessing program outcomes, impacts, or processes using standardized indicators or measures. Performance measures can provide data on program effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability, and can also be used to track progress over time. Next, we have cost effectiveness analysis. It involves comparing the costs of a program or intervention with its outcomes or impacts. It can help assess the efficiency and value for money of a program and can inform resource allocation decisions. Then we have stakeholder feedback. It can provide valuable insights into the relevance, acceptability, and sustainability of a program and can help inform its improvements. Having gone through the basics of evaluation, we are now equipped with the right background to move to discussing the evaluation process, which is divided into 4 phases, which include planning. The relevant questions during evaluation planning and implementation involve determining the feasibility of the evaluation, identifying stakeholders, and specifying short and long-term goals. For example, does the program have the clarity of objectives or transparency in its methods required for evaluation? What criteria were used to determine the need for the program? Second is implementation. Evaluation during program implementation could be used to inform mid-course corrections to program implementation or to shed light on implementation processes. Third is completion. Evaluation may look at its short-term results, long-term effects, or sum up its total performance, including its sustainability and efficiency. Fourth is dissemination and reporting. One must create a dissemination plan during the evaluation's planning phase in order to ensure that the results are disseminated and reported to all appropriate audiences in a thorough and methodical manner. This strategy should specify who will present the results, for what audiences, and who will be listed as a co-author on papers and presentations. There are 3 stages during the MEL process that evaluation can take place at. These are before implementation, during implementation, and after implementation. Let us discuss each of these in detail. Before implementation. At this stage, there are 4 types of evaluations, which include formative evaluation, which helps decide on the program strategies which can be used to improve or strengthen the program implementation. Then there is needs assessment, which analyzes and prioritizes needs to inform planning for an intervention. The third type is evaluability assessment, which assesses the extent to which an intervention can be evaluated in a reliable and credible fashion. Lastly, there is evidence synthesis, which combines evidence from previous research and evaluation to inform the design of a new intervention. During implementation. During implementation, there are 2 types of evaluation: process and developmental evaluation. Process evaluation examines the nature and quality of implementation of an intervention. It takes place prior to achievement of outcomes and can include fidelity evaluation, cycles of quality improvement, and documenting innovations. Developmental evaluation, also known as embedded evaluation, helps figure out how an intervention or program is improving. During implementation, monitoring helps collect and use data about an intervention on a regular basis for internal management and accountability reporting. After implementation, the types of evaluation that occur include outcome evaluation, which helps evaluate the effects of an intervention, including the intended and unintended, positive and negative, direct and indirect results. Another type is impact evaluation, which shows that there is a link between the intervention and the results. Next kind is value for money evaluation, which includes things like cost-benefit and cost-utility analysis, among others. Lastly, a sustained and emerging impact evaluation looks at the long-term effects of an intervention, sometimes after it's over for knowledge creation. What is an evaluation question and how is it relevant to MEL? To be straightforward, these are the questions the evaluation must answer. A carefully developed set of evaluation questions should give structure to the evaluation, lead to appropriate and thoughtful planning, and serve as a basis for essential discussions about who is interested in the answers and how they will be used. A good evaluation question should address issues that are meaningful in relation to the nature of the program. They should consider the concerns of the stakeholders. They should also be answerable with research techniques that are available to the evaluator. Evaluation questions are not just guiding questions to the evaluation, but are also reflective of the values of the evaluator, of the donor, and of the program team. Values also influence what questions in the context of the evaluation are deemed to fit. They are also a function of the primary stakeholders in the context of an evaluation and what they think should be the aim of the evaluation. They are dependent on and in turn influence evaluation approaches, whether the approach is post-positivist, pragmatic, constructivist, or transformative. With this understanding of evaluation questions, let us proceed with how to develop them. The process involves 5 steps. Recognizing the importance of the evaluator's role. An evaluator should be cognizant of the positionality, give priority to the program and the stakeholders. Next is identifying the primary stakeholders and keeping them in the loop while also incorporating concerns of other stakeholders. Third is pursuing meaningful and useful questions, which must be precise and concise. Fourth is finding questions that need answers. It's like finding a research gap while starting out research. An evaluation should answer questions that are previously unanswered. Number 5 is understanding the obligations of the legal or funding agency. Questions should be framed to meet the needs of the donor or organizational requirements. We identified 3 primary reasons why evaluation questions are so important. First is the fact that they act as a guiding force for program strategy. The EQs set the stage for operationalizing an evaluation, and the results of the evaluation lead to better informed insights for guiding program strategy. Second is that they lead to program improvement. Well-informed EQs ask where the program is struggling and how it can be made better in the future. While guiding program strategy is more macro level, improvement in the program is more micro level. Finally, EQs can lead to potential social change. By answering questions about existing inequities in society, whether they are common or specific to the program, EQs can lead to possible social change. By making the evaluation focus on power dynamics, they can use evidence gathered during the evaluation to argue for social change. In the process of evaluation of a set of projects, we need to begin with the planning stage to formulate a systematic framework. However, prior to the planning stage, it is imperative for us to identify the evaluant for the investigation. Let us first understand what we even mean by the term. Evaluant can simply be understood as the entity that is being evaluated. We must keep in mind to choose an evaluant that is easier to understand and derive the underlying information through the evaluation process. Identifying or establishing the evaluant will depend on the nature of the program. Before beginning the planning stage, an initial portrayal of the evaluant is required to determine its nature, such as being descriptive or graphic or both, static or dynamic or both. This is necessary as it will allow us to portray the evaluant determined by the nature of the investigation and the evaluation of the program. In evaluation, the values are used to show what we want or what we want to find out about a program based on our concerns. The values have to be negotiated at every step of an evaluation, depending on their type, such as scientific, political, professional values, etc. Since the process of evaluation itself is an inherently value-driven exercise, the context and values in an evaluation are interrelated as both inform one another. Values are not rigid, due to which they are negotiable and subjective to the program. However, these values are identified based on the context of evaluation and the concerned stakeholders. So, figuring out who the stakeholders are in an evaluation is important because it helps us understand the values of each stakeholder evaluation and the program as a whole. However, before we proceed further, we need to consider 3 questions. Number 1, whose values? Number 2, what values? And number 3, how to value. Now let's understand what it means when considering the aforementioned questions in the evaluation process. In evaluation, there will be different players who value different things. These are the stakeholders who will vary from one program to another, but mostly include the government, donors, funders, program team, as well as the community. For your understanding, we have classified the factors to understand the stakeholders on the right side. The figure classifies the factors such as who makes the decisions and how they are made, who is affected by the evaluation, and who intends to use the evaluation information. Apart from these factors, stakeholders may also be understood as primary stakeholders and interested stakeholders. We can also understand them through the power interest matrix. This matrix helps us to map stakeholder interest with power, revealing the dynamics that may lead to a certain group's values being considered more important than others. It is important to remember that even an evaluator had values that they knowingly or unknowingly engaged in during an evaluation. As it is explained with the help of the figure, it is important to be cognizant of one's own values as an evaluator to keep the interest of the stakeholders and manage the information. Now that we have gone through the importance of stakeholders' values and the factors to understand the types of stakeholders, we can now move towards understanding the next question, which is, what values? Values that are identified as important depend on the evaluation approach undertaken for the program. Approaches can be understood in the form of a tree with 4 branches, which represent 4 paradigms or approaches to evaluation. Now let's understand what these 4 different paradigms are. The first paradigm, the positivist approach, focuses primarily on quantitative designs and data, therefore giving preference to objectivity. The second paradigm, pragmatic evaluation, focuses on data that would be useful for stakeholders and usually uses mixed methods. The next paradigm, the constructivist approach, focuses on identifying multiple values and perspectives through primarily qualitative methods. And lastly, the transformative approach focuses on the viewpoints of marginalized groups and aims to further social justice, mostly employing mixed methods. We can also employ the values depending on the criteria for the taken-up evaluation program. The most common criteria employed is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development criteria, popularly known as the OECD DAC criteria. For your understanding, we have prepared a table of the determinants used in the OECD DAC criteria to evaluate a program on the basis of 6 factors, namely relevance, coherence, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. Let us take a look at the third aspect, which is how to value. On both sides of the stakeholders and the evaluator, it is a given that they hold subjective values and biases irrespective of each other. As such, it is very important for an evaluator to be mindful of one's position in the evaluation exercise. This is known as reflexivity. For an evaluator, one needs to acknowledge and incorporate differing perspectives and experience of individuals and communities. The issues of systemic power dynamics cannot be neglected, especially when dealing with sensitive contexts or marginalized communities, such as children, women, SC/ST communities, and racial minorities. As a result, one needs to develop an intersectional understanding of the evaluant and surrounding context, along with the awareness of one's own positionality. To understand the context of the values better, we need to dive into the concepts and need for intersectionality. To do an evaluation, we need to understand the context of the evaluation in the first place. But what is the need for context in evaluation? Before we do that, we shall define what context even means in the first place. It is defined as the setting within which the evaluant and thus the evaluation are situated. Context is the site, location, environment, or milieu for a given evaluant. They identify 5 specific dimensions to context in evaluation: demographic characteristics of the setting, material and economic features, institutional and organizational climate, interpersonal dimensions or typical means of interaction and norms, and finally, political dynamics of the setting, issues, and interests. In evaluation of a program, context is important as it brings the different values which were important to guide the evaluation process and bring out the different value perspectives of the stakeholders and any additional factors for the study. Context can help us understand the goals and unique characteristics of the program participants, any environmental, social, and cultural factors that may influence the outcomes, and any existing resources as well as constraints that may impact the implementation and effectiveness of the program. Culture is very important to the evaluation process. How, you may ask? Culture is a set of socially transmitted and learned behavior patterns and all other products of human work and thought that characterize the functioning of a particular population, profession, organization, or community. The process of information exchange, interpretation, and application of knowledge are influenced by the cultures of the participants, including the evaluators. Kirkhardt urged evaluators to turn their attention to culture, stating that multicultural influences shape and are shaped by their work. According to her, there are several ways that culture can affect evaluation, such as understanding the different goals and values of different cultures and how these can impact the way stakeholders perceive and understand the differences. This ensures that they are considered when developing the plans and framework. Cultures have different criteria for success, and these can affect how the stakeholders perceive the success of an evaluation. For instance, some cultures may place more value in individual achievements, while others may prioritize collective outcomes. The language used in evaluation can impact how the stakeholders understand and interpret the evaluation results. Cultural factors also affect the trust and credibility of the evaluators and outcomes. Evaluators need to be aware of the cultural differences and ensure that they build trust and credibility with all stakeholders in an appropriate manner. These are the reasons why cross-cultural evaluation models and practices have become important for the long run in the evaluation process. What do we mean by the term intersectionality? Simply put, intersectionality is understanding how aspects of an individual's or community's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Let us look at the example given by Crenshaw. For instance, a black woman would face multiple types of discrimination based on different intersections or overlaps in terms of her identity. In case she is gay, she would face discrimination at all intersections that her identity encompasses. This can be understood with the help of the figure on the right. Hence, it is extremely important that evaluations are intersectional, especially when the existing power structure may put communities at a disadvantage. It encompasses several elements for analysis: financial, economic, social, and environmental. Evaluating sustainability provides valuable insight into the continuation of an intervention's net benefits in the medium to longer term. It ensures long-term impact as it focuses on the ability of the program to continue producing positive outcomes and impacts over time. It enhances accountability as it ensures that interventions and programs are designed and implemented with a long-term impact in mind, and if they have the necessary resources for the desired outcomes. It promotes adaptive management, which includes understanding the political, social, economic, and environmental factors that may impact the program in the longer term. Research design is the set of research methods and techniques chosen by a researcher to conduct a study. Simply put, when we discuss a strategy to collect, study, and evaluate data, we talk about research design. This enables the researcher to identify problems, leading to the creation of a consistent and logical model for data analysis. Research design has a set of characteristics that allows the researcher to avoid errors and present the desired outcome, such as the following. Number 1, neutrality. The results which are projected from the research should be free from bias, both internally and externally. Number 2, reliability. The research plan should indicate how the questions are formed to endure the standards of results. Number 3, validity. It is important that the correct measuring tools are used to gauge results according to the objective of the research. Number 4, generalization. The outcome should apply to population and not just expected sample. But let us discuss why we need to prepare a design for research in the first place. The design provides a firm foundation. It reduces uncertainty and confusion about the research problem. Research design is helpful for collecting the research materials. It gives an idea regarding the type of resources required in terms of money, human resources, time, and efforts. It guides the research in the right direction and many other factors that prove beneficial to the direction and outcome of the research. A researcher must clearly understand the various types of research design to implement for a study. The design of the analysis can be classified into causal, descriptive, and exploratory designs. Causal research can be understood as a type of conclusive research that attempts to establish a cause and effect relationship between two or more variables. This type of research is widely employed by companies and corporations. It assists in determining the impact of the change in process and the existing methods, narrowing down the cause and effect relationship. For example, we can consider how much COVID-19 has impacted the global economy. Descriptive research can be described as a phenomena and its different characteristics to gain a deeper understanding of what it is without addressing why or how it happens. This type of research enables the researcher to get a proper understanding of a research problem before beginning to investigate it. An example could be tracking changes in the global economy in the post-COVID-19 situation. Exploratory research is a design that is used to investigate a research problem that is not clearly defined or understood, which enables the researcher with a deeper understanding of the problem and its context before research can be carried out. The implications of COVID-19 on the global economy can be considered as an example for the same. Here is an overview of a research design for your reference. To determine the cause and effect relationship between factors, there are two research methods within the causal research design. On the screen is a table that summarizes the similarities and differences between an experimental and a quasi-experimental study design. As you can see in the table, both experimental and quasi-experimental methods have similar objectives, which are to evaluate the effect of an intervention or a treatment. However, there are many differences in both these research methods when it comes to factors like the selection of participants, control group, room of confounding, level of evidence, their advantages, and limitations. Impact evaluation is an assessment of how the intervention being evaluated affects outcomes, whether these effects are intended or unintended. For impact evaluation, we will need to consider certain factors. The objective of impact evaluation is what is the impact or causal effect of a program on an outcome of interest. Here, the central question would be the magnitude of change and the attribution of change. But what is the importance of impact evaluation in a study? The need to use impact evaluation can be determined by considering if the program has achieved the intended goals and the kind of policy decisions needed in order to expand, modify, or eliminate a program. This in turn brings about the question of how the changes would impact the treatment group without the program. We will then require a counterfactual or comparison group identical to the treatment group to establish causality, attributing changes to the treatment. Now let us understand what is meant by a counterfactual group. A counterfactual group can be understood as a group of non-participants, which is statistically identical to the participant group in the absence of the program. This enables the researcher to understand what would likely have happened to the members subject to the intervention had they not been exposed to the counterfactual case. The program would be ideally identical to the treatment group in observable and unobservable characteristics, and this treatment should be the only difference between an ideal comparison and a project group. Process evaluation ascertains whether program activities have been carried out in accordance with the planned outcomes. It helps to understand the mechanisms involved in the creation of successful programs that achieved the intended outcomes, and these programs can be reused and developed for other contexts. It can also be used when a program does not achieve the objectives for the targeted populations. So periodically, over the duration of the program, process evaluation can be done to analyze the logic model's input and output components. The central questions of process evaluation would be to track two things: the magnitude and attribution of change. Why is it important to use process evaluation in a study? This method of evaluation is used for the researcher to be able to report on the program and utilize the information to improve the subsequent actions because of the findings of a process evaluation. This method also enables the researcher to keep track of the who, what, when, and where information about the programs, such as what would happen to the treatment group without the program, or who was the target of your program efforts, or when did the activities for the program take place. Randomized control trial is an experimental form of impact evaluation where intervention is the only difference between the two groups, such as that one group receives the intervention that is being tested, whereas for the other group, they are receiving an alternative treatment. This form of design, considered the most robust of all evaluation methodologies, involves gathering a set of equally eligible individuals willing to participate in the program and randomly dividing them into treatment and control group. The control group for this method is generated through random assignment to serve as the perfect counterfactual, free from selection bias. This randomization of groups depends on the level at which the program is implemented, such as through individual level randomized control trial and cluster RCT, such as the village level, school level, etc. The diagram on the screen explains how the random selection and random assignment is carried out for a study. Randomized control trials are prospective studies that measure the effectiveness of new interventions or treatment. RCTs are the gold standard for studying causal relationship because it involves randomization. The act of randomization balances participant characteristics between groups. This enables the reduction of bias and provides a rigorous tool to examine the cause-effect relationships between an intervention and outcome. On the other hand, this method of research has certain limitations, such as having ethical issues involved in the implementation. It is also an expensive method that requires an abundance of time and money while also having a risk of contamination or spillover of the gathered information. RCT has a method or implementation strategy called the stepped wedge design, which is used in special cases where the program would be implemented in a phased manner. A stepped wedge design is a type of randomized controlled trial that is used to evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention. It is used when it is not feasible to randomly assign participants to the intervention or control group at the same time. In this design, the group of participants are randomly assigned to receive the intervention at different points in time. This allows for the collection of data on the intervention's effectiveness over time, as well as the identification of any potential confounding factors. Stepped wedge designs can be a useful tool for evaluating the effectiveness of interventions in a variety of settings. To have a clearer understanding of the stepped wedge RCT, let us look at an example. For instance, let us try to estimate the use of technology in increasing learning gains. Firstly, we need to assume that the program will run for a period of 3 years. In this program, there will be a group of 300 students who are randomly selected from a school and divided into 3 groups of 100 each. Now suppose the first group was given a tablet with preloaded educational content in the first year. The second group was given a tablet with content in the second year. Finally, the third group was given the tablet with the content in the third year. To track the effects of the tablet distribution among the 3 groups, we need to measure the learning levels of each group every year. We will find that in the first year, the difference between the first and second or third group was the impact due to the intervention for 1 year. Consequently, in the second year, the difference between the first and second group was the impact after 1 more year of intervention, whereas the difference between the first and the third group would be the impact of giving the technology for 2 continuous years. And finally, this method would ensure that by the third year, all students would get the technology. Now let us understand the method of quasi-experimental design. The quasi or semi-experimental designs are experimental designs where the allocation of treatment is not random. This type of research design aims to establish a cause and effect relationship between an independent and dependent variable. In comparison to other methods such as experimental or randomized controlled trial, the quasi-experimental designs are less robust. The control and treatment in this method are also not randomly distributed, which might give rise to bias. In this method of research design, various techniques are used to create a counterfactual, depending on the stage of program implementation and data availability. The difference in difference method is a quasi-experimental approach that compares the changes in outcomes over time between a treatment group that is part of a program and the comparison group that is outside of the program. This method involves comparing 2 groups, one that receives a treatment and another that does not, before and after an intervention takes place. The difference in difference outcomes between the 2 groups is then analyzed to determine the impact of the intervention. The outcomes of both groups before and after the intervention are also compared to see if there was any change over time. To conduct the study, it requires at least 2 cross-sections of data pre-programmed on treatment and control groups. Finally, difference in difference cleans all time-varying factors such as selection bias from the first difference by subtracting the second difference from it. To have a clearer understanding of the concept, let's take an example of estimating the use of technology in increasing learning gains. First, let's assume that instead of randomly selecting students, every student of one school, let's say A, was given the content-loaded tablet. In this case, you do not have a proper counterfactual. Therefore, you randomly select some students for school A and some others for school B, which you believe shares some similar characteristics. Now, we need to establish a pre-post design in both cases. There's another approach to quasi-experimental research known as matching. This approach requires both the representative and comparable data for the treatment and comparison groups. The propensity score or probability score of the two samples based on the selected observable characteristics needs to be calculated. We need to restrict the sample to the units where common support appears in the propensity score distribution. For each enrolled unit, one has to locate a subgroup of non-enrolled units with similar propensity scores. When we compare the outcome of the treatment group with their matched comparison group, we will be able to find the difference in the average outcomes of the subgroups, and that it is the measure of the impact that can be attributed to the program. The mean of these individual impacts yields the estimated average treatment. Let us understand the concept of PSM by looking at this fictitious scenario to understand its implications. The table implies the scenario which has resulted in the following implications while taking into account the indicator of the households in treatment areas against the comparison areas. Regression discontinuity is another approach of quasi-experimental research. It is an approach that is used for programs that use a continuous variable to index, to rank potential participants in a program. This method can be used when there is some kind of criterion that must be met before people can participate in the intervention being evaluated. There is a cutoff point or threshold along the variable which is used to determine the eligibility criteria, that is, whether a potential participant receives the program. For example, the poverty score or index generated based on the edge assets to deciding PPL households, pension programs based on retirement age cutoff. Here, the candidates just below the cutoff point are like the candidates just above the cutoff point. So, it can be treated as the control group. Now let us understand what regression discontinuity design, RDD, is. It is an impact evaluation method that can be used for programs that have a continuous eligibility index with a clearly defined eligibility threshold. It determines who is eligible and who is not. For a researcher to use this approach efficiently for a study, they must be mindful of meeting the following conditions. The index must rank people or units in a continuous or smooth way. The index must have a clearly defined cutoff score, that is, a point on the index above or below which the population is classified as eligible for the program. The cutoff must be unique to the program of interest, that is, there should be no other programs apart from the program to be evaluated that uses the same cutoff score. The score of a particular individual or unit cannot be manipulated by enumerators, potential beneficiaries, program administrators, or politicians. Among the many approaches of quasi-experimental research designs, as we have already come across, there is the instrumental variable approach. This type of approach is one that overcomes androgeneity. It is applicable in the case of programs having universal coverage and voluntary enrollment. When conducting the instrumental variable approach, the program administrator cannot control who will participate in the program. For example, skill development missions and job training programs. The randomized promotion is an instrumental variable that allows us to create variation between units, and this variation can be used to create a valid comparison group. To conduct this method, there needs to be three types of participants, which are based on their intrinsic characters and cannot be measured by the program evaluator. These groups are namely never enroll group, always enroll group, and enroll if promoted group. In this study, the impact is measured based on the enrollment of promoted group. The counterfactual in this approach can be created by a random distribution of this variable in treatment and control groups. For example, an outreach worker would randomly select the individual to whom they visit and explain the program to. For this approach, the assumptions that are important for the study are as such. The instrumental variable should be effective enough to increase enrollment substantially amongst enrolled if promoted group. The promoted and non-promoted groups must be comparable. Promotional activity should not affect the outcome of interest. The instrumental variable of quasi-experimental research can be understood with the help of the following diagram. In this example, first, one needs to identify the population which is eligible for such an evaluation. Out of the eligible population, the evaluation sample is then drawn out. Following these steps, two groups are identified, that is, treatment group where the promotion is done and the control group where no promotion is done. After this, enrollment is listed. Finally, when the evaluation is taken over, it turns out that the promoted group leads to 80% enrollment and the non-promoted group leads to 30% enrollment. This ultimately leads to an impact of 50%. Apart from experimental and quasi-experimental designs, there also exists another set of research techniques called the non-experimental designs, NED. Now let us understand what it entails and how it can be used for research purposes. So, non-experimental designs are impact evaluation designs that do not include a matched comparison group. This type of research lacks the manipulation of an independent variable, so rather than manipulating it, the researchers conduct non-experimental research to simply measure variables as they naturally occur. Here, the outcomes and the impacts of the program are assessed without a conventional counterfactual to address the reasons behind the study. Now let us understand some potential NED that can be used for research. Number 1. Pre-test post-test design. In this type of NED, the evaluators will survey the intervention group before and after the intervention. However, in this approach, even though we are able to track the changes in the outcome through observation, it cannot be attributed to the intervention. Number 2. Time series designs. In this approach of NED, the researchers can look for changes over time that will enable them to determine the trend. The evaluators will observe the intervention multiple times before and after the intervention. This will help in the analysis of trends for before and after. Third is longitudinal study. This is another type of time series design. For this, the researchers repeatedly examine the same individuals to detect any changes that might occur over a period of time. Here, the researchers collect the same variable over time without trying to influence these variables. Under longitudinal design, there is a special type of approach called panel design. This method involves taking the same measures repeatedly from the same samples, often a small group, at different points in time to detect the changes and record their experiences in greater detail. There are advantages and limitations to using non-experimental designs for a study. The approach has an advantage of being versatile, which can be used to observe many unique phenomena while analyzing the collected data from the past to the present. It can also be far more affordable to use this design in comparison to the experimental kind. In order to make NEDs more efficient and strengthen the use of this method, we can take certain measures. The evaluators should measure the participants' level of exposure to the program. So if the participants with higher exposure show higher change in outcome indicator, it will strengthen the argument of the program leading to the change. Therefore, it is important to control the variables statistically to accurately measure the variables of interest. One can collect data from the same participants over time using the longitudinal study. Here, the characteristics of the individuals can be controlled based on real time, while eliminating the risk of recall bias and allowing an insight into cause and effect relationships. Sampling is the process of selecting a portion of a population to represent the whole population in statistical analysis. It is used to collect data from a large population in an efficient and cost-effective manner without having to study the entire population. Some of the key considerations during this process include sample size and representativeness. Sampling process is of two types: probability sampling and non-probability sampling, which we will now discuss. Probability sampling is a method where each unit in the population has a known and non-zero chance of being selected. This method is suitable for inferential statistics and hypothesis testing, and its results are representative of the populations and unbiased. It is easy to analyze and generalize, but this method has certain disadvantages. It is time-consuming and complex and requires a complete list of the population. Some of its examples include simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, etc. Now we have non-probability sampling, a method of sampling where the chance of a unit being selected cannot be accurately determined. Its use is limited to inferential statistics and is often used in exploratory research. This method is quick, easy to conduct, flexible, and suitable for hard-to-reach populations. But the results derived from this method may be biased, not representative of the population, and difficult to generalize. Some of its examples include for convenience sampling, quota sampling, snowball sampling, judgment sampling, among others. Something called the sampling and non-sampling error. A sampling error occurs when a researcher chooses a sample which is not representative of the population. On the other hand, non-sampling error refers to errors other than the sampling, such as error in the estimation. There are ways to mitigate such sampling errors, which include analyzing the sample in the planning phase, execution phase, as well as the analysis phase. Sometimes, despite adopting all these steps, it is difficult for researchers to remove sampling bias, which occurs when some members of a population are systematically more likely to be selected in a sample than others. For example, to analyze the voting patterns for presidential elections, if you poll 1,000 middle-class, blue-collar voters, the sample will be heavily biased because it won't be diverse enough to paint the whole picture. Now, there are different types of probability sampling based on different requirements: simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, and finally, cluster random sampling. Let us describe each one of these briefly. First up is simple random sampling. This is a type of sampling in which the researcher randomly selects a subset of participants from a population. Each individual has an equal chance of being selected. Next is systematic random sampling. It is a probability sampling method in which a random sample is selected from the population with a fixed periodic interval. The periodic interval, which is also known as the sampling interval, is calculated by dividing the population size by the desired sample size. Third is stratified random sampling. It involves the division of a population into smaller subgroups known as strata. In stratified random sampling or stratification, the strata are formed based on members' shared attributes or characteristics, such as income or educational attainment. And finally, we have cluster random sampling. In this method, you need to divide the population into clusters, such as districts or schools, and then randomly select some of these clusters as your sample. The clusters should ideally each be mini representations of the population as a whole. Let us now discuss non-probability sampling. There are 4 kinds. Convenience sampling, which includes the individuals who happen to be most accessible to the researcher. Second is voluntary response sampling. Here, instead of the researcher choosing participants and directly contacting them, people volunteer themselves. Then we have purposive sampling, which involves the researcher using their expertise to select a sample that is most useful to the purposes of the research. And finally, we have snowball sampling. If the population is hard to access, snowball sampling can be used to recruit participants via other participants. The number of people you have to access to snowballs as you get in contact with more people. To select a sample for monitoring and evaluation, it is crucial to understand each step in the process, which is what we will do in this section. First, you must define the purpose of monitoring, which basically means to determine the specific objectives of the monitoring evaluation. Then you must identify the key metrics or indicators that are relevant to the monitoring evaluation. These may include performance measures, quality standards, or other relevant criteria that align with the objectives of the monitoring. After identifying the indicators, you move on to determining the sample size. For this, consider the appropriate sample size based on statistical principles. A larger sample size generally provides more reliable results, but it may also require more resources and time. Select a sample size that is statistically significant and appropriate for the level of accuracy desired. Next step is to clearly define the boundaries and characteristics of the sampling frame to ensure that the sample is representative. After determining the sample size, it is crucial to choose a sampling method that is appropriate for your specific monitoring evaluation objectives and sampling frame. Although you have decided on the sampling method and size, you have to be mindful of potential biases that may affect the sample selection process. Then, you must document the sample selection process. Keep detailed records of the sample selection process, including the sampling method used, the sample size, and any considerations or adjustments made. Finally, you must conduct the monitoring evaluation. Once the sample has been selected, collect and analyze the data according to the defined metrics and objectives of the exercise. The sample size of the research is not a rule of thumb. Rather, it depends upon a host of factors such as the objectives of the study, availability of resources, sampling error, size of the sampling subgroup for which data has to be collected, and heterogeneity of the universe. The calculation of sample size depends upon some key factors, which include significance, the likelihood that the measured effect did not occur by chance. Significance level is denoted by alpha, which is the type 1 error. Power, the likelihood that when a program or treatment has an effect, you will be able to distinguish the effect, which is type 2 error. The loss of effectiveness by using cluster sampling instead of simple random sampling is the design effect. The design effect is the ratio of the actual variance under the sampling method used to the variance computed under the assumption of simple random sampling. The formula on screen denotes the design effect. Then we have the margin of error, a percentage that tells you how much you can expect your survey results to reflect the views of the overall population. The smaller the margin of error, the closer you are to having the exact answer at a given confidence level. Now that we know the estimation of sample size and the key criteria associated with it, let us take a look at how to do so. First, we must define the objectives of the survey and determine the population. Then, we must select the appropriate sampling method, after which primary sampling units need to be determined. The next step involves obtaining the sampling frame, which includes a list of all the sampling units. Then, we need to decide the sample size, after which we execute it. Why is learning important? Learning is important for internal audiences, funders, and stakeholders for several reasons. First, it enhances performance. Learning helps to improve their performance by acquiring new knowledge, skills, abilities, and to stay updated with the latest trends and best practices. Secondly, it leads to innovation and adaptability. Learning fosters innovation, adaptability, and encourages them to think critically, explore new ideas, and embrace change to thrive in a rapidly changing environment. It also increases stakeholder engagement. It enables internal audiences, funders, and stakeholders to understand the needs, expectations, and perspectives of different stakeholders and adapt their communication and engagement strategies accordingly. Learning brings organizational resilience. It contributes to organizational resilience with the knowledge and skills needed to navigate challenges and uncertainties. It promotes accountability and transparency. It enables them to continuously monitor, evaluate, and improve their performance and demonstrate their value and impact to others. It helps in long-term sustainability. It helps to stay relevant, adaptable, and agile in dynamic environments to sustain their performance and impact over time. We can take the following measures to effectively utilize the monitoring findings. Firstly, it can be used to evaluate the performance of programs, projects, or initiatives. Secondly, it can serve as a basis for evidence-based decision-making by providing data, information, and insights that inform decision-makers about the progress, achievements, and challenges of a program or project. Thirdly, it can be used to report on the progress and results of a program to various stakeholders, such as funders, donors, and other relevant parties. Then, the findings can be used as a learning tool for continuous improvement. It can also be used to assess whether a program or project is meeting its intended goals and targets, and whether resources are being used effectively and efficiently. It can provide feedback to stakeholders, including beneficiaries, staff, and partners, on the progress and results of a program or project. Finally, it can support adaptive management, where organizations can use the findings to make adjustments and modifications to their programs in real time. Utilizing evaluation findings is essential to ensure that the evaluation efforts are meaningful and have an impact on decision-making. Following are some ways to utilize evaluation findings. Fundamentally, policy evaluation supports effective public administration. It can assist governments in bettering the formulation and implementation of public policies, which can then result in economic growth and improved welfare. Through better decision-making, policy evaluation helps to foster public accountability, learning, and higher effectiveness in the public sector. If the program is successful, the findings can be used to identify the best practices and strategies that can be replicated in other settings. This can help to scale up the program and achieve a greater impact. We can use the findings from monitoring and evaluation of the program to identify stakeholder information needs, which involves identifying what information is relevant and meaningful to different stakeholders based on their interests, roles, and expectations. Number 2, tailor communication channels and formats. Utilize communication channels and formats that are most appropriate for the stakeholders, which can include reports, newsletters, websites, etc. Use clear and accessible language. Avoid technical jargon or complex language, and use a language that is accessible and easily understood by stakeholders. Provide timely and relevant information. Share information when it is most needed and ensure that it is accurate, up-to-date, and aligned with the stakeholders' interests and concerns. Foster two-way communication. Encouraging such communication with stakeholders to facilitate dialogue, feedback, and exchange of ideas can be very helpful. Contextualize information. This involves providing information in the context that is meaningful to stakeholders and relates the information to the specific objective, goals, and outcomes of the program. Ensuring confidentiality and privacy of the concerns of stakeholders, especially when dealing with sensitive information, is crucial to the process.